It was late, almost midnight, and I was walking home from the library. It was a long walk and I was tired, but I figured it was good exercise. I had a bunch of old books I had checked out for my research paper about the history of the railroad industry. I'm in college, studying history, and for some reason I'm obsessed with the history of railroads. I can't explain it. It was a cold night, and the streets were deserted. I was starting to get a little creeped out. But I had my headphones in and I was listening to my favorite music, so I was trying not to pay attention to it. Then, I noticed a van pulling up beside me. It was a white, old-fashioned minivan, nothing fancy, with no windows in the back. I noticed it was going slow, like it was waiting for me. The driver, a man I'd never seen before, offered me a ride, saying he was going my way. I politely declined, saying I just had a few blocks to walk. But he insisted. He rolled down his window and said, "Come on, I'm going right past your house. You can save yourself the walk." I didn't know this guy. I had no idea if he was telling the truth, but he really seemed to want me to get in. For some reason, I felt a bit uneasy, but I thought it was just common sense. I figured it was probably unsafe to get into a stranger's vehicle by myself, in the middle of the night. He smiled wider. The stranger's smile was a little too eager, a little too wide, a little too friendly. He said, "Come on. I'll even take your books inside." But I just kept walking. I smiled and waved him off, trying to make it seem like I wasn't scared, but I was moving quickly. I didn't want to seem like I was afraid of him. It seemed like the best strategy to avoid getting into a potentially dangerous situation. After I walked a few blocks, I looked back to see if the van was still behind me. It was. It was still following me, slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. It seemed like the guy in the van was deliberately keeping pace with me. The van kept following me. It didn't seem like it was going to turn away. The guy in the van kept watching me, and he was starting to make me nervous. I tried to speed up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I also started getting tired. The books I was carrying were heavy. It was then I spotted a police car parked down the street, maybe 2 blocks away. I walked quickly. Even in a hurry, I couldn't help glancing back at the van. It was still behind me. So I started sprinting. I ran as fast as I could towards the police car. In my haste, I tripped. I fell hard, scraping my hand on the pavement. I got back up quickly, but I stumbled again. The van was right behind me. The guy in the van had stopped his car. I could see him looking at me in his rearview mirror, as if he was making sure I was coming back to him. I was close to the police car. Even though it was a good distance, it seemed less distant after I fell and started to run. The guy in the van started to speak. I could hear him over the roar of my own breathing. He sounded like he was saying in a loud and commanding tone, "Get in the van, now." I didn't think he was going to try to chase me. I thought he was just going to stay in his van and wait until I got back. It was a strange situation. It was then I heard the sound of the van's door. I turned around just in time to see the man standing there, just a few feet away, outside his van, ready to come after me. I scrambled up and ran. I was terrified. I started to run again. My adrenaline was pumping. I ran hard. I didn't look back. The guy in the van ran to catch me. I had no time to think. I could only run and run and run. I didn't know what he was going to do, but I knew I had to get away. I was running by the police car now. I didn't see any officer in the car. I kept running, then I tripped again. This time I was closer to the van. The guy was already getting closer. He was closing the distance fast. He reached for me, stretching his hand forward trying to grab me. His expression was twisted. It was the kind of expression I had never seen on the face of any human being. I scrambled to my feet. I saw a large iron gate that is always open. I started to run towards it. It was my only chance to get away. The guy was behind me. He was still running. I turned back to see if he was close, but I saw the gate. It was just a few feet away. I went through the gate. I was lucky, and somehow the gate closed suddenly. It was as if it had a mind of its own. It closed itself just at the right moment. The guy stopped at the gate. I could see him look at me through the iron bars. I was in a small driveway behind the gate. I saw a small house. I stood by the wall. I couldn't believe I had managed to get away. It was then I heard the sound of the gate as it was being opened. I managed to squeeze myself between a brick wall and some bushes. The van stopped on the driveway's asphalt. I held my breath. The guy was on the driveway. He looked around. He couldn't find me. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of the van pulling away. I stood behind the brick wall, looking at the front of the house, for a long time. I was in shock. I was still scared. I didn't know what to do. Finally, I started walking towards my house. It was a long walk home. I had to retrace my steps. It was way longer than I expected. I felt tired, and I kept thinking about what might have happened to me if I had gotten into the van. I was still shaken to the core. I wanted to tell someone, but I just didn't know what to say. I walked for what felt like hours. I had no idea where I was. I started to fear that I was lost. It was then I saw a sign. It was a street sign. I looked at the sign and I realized I had been walking in circles. I had gone no further than a few blocks from the library. Couldn't believe it. Was it real? What was the man's intention? Was he going to kidnap me? I sat on a bench in front of my house, letting it all sink in, and I called my sister. I told her everything. She came to pick me up, and then she took me to the police station. I filed a report. The police officer seemed to believe my story. He said, "It's good that you got away." He was looking at my scraped hands. I was relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had dodged a bullet. I still get chills when I think about it. In the weeks that followed, I did my best to return to my normal life. I was careful to avoid that part of the city at night. I always looked over my shoulder. I made sure to tell someone when I was walking home, and I was even more cautious about accepting rides from strangers. I had been lucky to survive that night, but the memory of that night has stayed with me. I've always felt like I had to stay vigilant. And I had to stay sharp because you never know, that man could be out there trying to find me. I know it sounds crazy, but I think about it almost every day. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm just glad I survived. You know what is the worst part? I still look back. I still think I see that white van driving in the same area I saw it. It's just a little thing, but I was walking home from work late one night. It was a typical summer evening in the city, hot and humid. I was tired and just wanted to get home and relax. The bus stop was a few blocks from my apartment, and I usually took the bus, but I was in a hurry, so I decided to walk. I was walking down the street with my head down, looking at my phone, when a red van pulled up next to me. The driver rolled down the window and looked at me. He was a skinny guy with long, greasy, dark hair and pale skin. He smiled at me and said, "Hey, you going home?" "I'm headed that way." "Hop in." I was a little hesitant, but I didn't want to be rude. He looked harmless enough, and I was tired and wanted to get home. I figured I could just get out at the next block and walk the rest of the way. I got into the van. The driver didn't say anything else. He just started driving and kept looking at me. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. After a few minutes, we were driving on a different street that I didn't recognize. I started to get worried. "Hey, this isn't my street," I said. The driver just kept driving and didn't respond. It was getting really late and I was getting increasingly worried. The van stopped in front of a warehouse, and the driver put the car into park. The area was really dark and deserted, and I didn't recognize it. I grabbed my bag and turned towards the door, but the driver grabbed my arm before I could open it. The guy's eyes were blank. His look was emotionless and scary. He was holding a knife. "No, not yet. Stay with me for a while. You are really pretty. You can be my friend," the driver was saying. I froze. "What?" I asked. I was shaking. Then he smiled again, a really disturbing smile that didn't reach his eyes. He seemed to be getting closer. Luckily, I had my pepper spray on me. I had forgotten it was there. I remembered that my dad had given me it when I went to study abroad because he said that the city I was living in wasn't safe. I sprayed him in the face and he screamed, jumping back. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I jumped out of the van and ran as fast as I could, towards the street, towards the lights. I could hear the driver screaming something behind me, but I ignored him. I kept running and running until I reached a busy street. I felt safe again, and I was just trying to catch my breath. I looked back to see if the driver was following me, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I couldn't believe he had a knife. I learned my lesson. I will never accept a ride from a stranger again. I called my friend and she came to pick me up. I felt better when she got there. That was a couple of years ago. I got a lot better after that night. A few weeks later, I was on the bus, and it was very crowded. A lot of people were standing up, including me. It was hot and the windows of the bus were closed. Something weird was happening. It was hard to breathe. I felt sick. The people that were sitting in seats were staring at the people standing up. I was trying to get some air. I was really desperate to open a window. A man sitting in the front row was looking at me, staring at me intensely with a strange smile. His face was pale, his eyes were really dark, and his hair was long, greasy, and dirty. A sudden loud noise startled me. The bus driver had hit the brakes. It was a sudden jerk. I lost my balance and fell towards the driver. He was looking at me. He had a knife. I was just frozen. I looked at his eyes and I was scared. I looked at his face, and I saw that his look was the same I had seen in the driver's eyes years before. I bolted out of the bus. I ran. I ran and ran. I never got on another bus again. From that day on, I never felt safe again. I can't be in crowded places. I am always looking over my shoulder. I am always checking for that driver's face. I am always trying to hide. I feel like I am always in danger. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, trying to sleep, I can hear that van's engine, and I can hear that driver's laugh. So, this happened a few years back, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was working the graveyard shift at a convenience store, just your typical boring nighttime gig, you know? It was one of those nights that felt like it would never end, the kind where you just want to clock out and go home. Around 1:30 a.m., a guy walked in. He looked pretty normal, kind of skinny, pale, with long, greasy, dark hair, not a crazy-looking dude or anything. He was just unassuming. He bought a pack of cigarettes and a can of soda, then he walked out and I forgot all about him. A few hours later, right before my shift ended, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It was written on a piece of scrap paper in messy handwriting. It said, "Thank you for the ride. We had fun." My stomach dropped. I had no idea what this meant. I thought maybe it was just a prank, some weird joke from the cashier on the day shift. It would explain the note. After all, who would leave a note like that on a car in an empty parking lot? But then, things started getting creepy. I started seeing the guy again. Now, I wasn't seeing him in the store. I was seeing him at random places in the city. In the park, at my favorite coffee shop, even at the grocery store. He'd just be standing around, watching me, but not making contact. Even when I looked his way, he always seemed to look away. He wasn't threatening, just strangely focused on me. He wasn't following me, he wasn't approaching me, he just seemed to be there where I was. I know it sounds strange, but that's the only way to describe it. Like he was always one step ahead, ready to be seen when I least expected it. It was more unsettling than anything else. After a few weeks of this, it stopped suddenly. I thought maybe all the worry was getting to me. Maybe he was just a guy I saw in the city, and my mind was playing tricks. But then the note thing happened again, this time on my front door. It said, "I hope you find your keys soon." I did have a set of missing keys. They were a spare set and I had lost them a while back, but it was like he had a timeline of my life, like he knew me personally. It was terrifying. I called the cops, of course. They were understanding, but they said they couldn't do much. Without anything specific, it was impossible to track him down. They said it was probably a prank, but I knew it wasn't. The note, the way he looked at me, the whole thing just felt wrong. I felt like I was being watched, like I was in danger, even if I couldn't put my finger on exactly what felt so wrong. A few weeks later, I was driving home late one night from work. It was pouring rain, the kind of rain that can turn any street into a river. I was driving slowly and carefully, not wanting to risk an accident. Then I saw him. He was walking along the side of the road, looking lost in the darkness. It was like he deliberately placed himself in the way. I stopped the car. He walked up to the driver's side window, his face pale in the dim light of the street lamp. He looked straight at me and he said in a strangely calm voice, "It's a good thing you stopped." And in that moment, I knew he was doing this on purpose. He wasn't just watching me, he was waiting for me. I had a sense this was the culmination of everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a large, jagged piece of metal. I could only see the reflection of the street lamp in its polished surface. It was too dark to see what it was exactly. My heart skipped a beat and I fumbled with the door handle, but it jammed, stuck. The stranger took a step closer, his pale face inches from the window. Suddenly, the headlights of an oncoming truck blinded me and I felt my body tense. By the time the truck had passed, the stranger was gone. He just vanished, as if he had been a figment of my imagination. My door handle unjammed and I threw it open and ran out of the car, jumping into the rain-slicked street. I felt like I was being chased, even though the street was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there watching me. That was the last time I saw him. It was just too scary. I really don't understand what he wanted from me, but it was enough to make me move. I needed to escape the city, escape the memories, and I got a new job, moved to a different state. The police never found him. He was just a person that disappeared. But the note? It still hangs on my refrigerator, a chilling reminder of that night. I know it's ridiculous, but I keep it there as a reminder of something, of someone that I never want to encounter again. I know I'm probably just crazy, but the truth is, sometimes I still feel watched.